my father said, it's stupid to walk to the North Pole. And in one way, he was right. Today, we're very good friends, but what he didn't get is with everything in life, you need to believe in it.
Where did that belief in exploration come from?
Everyone is born an explorer. Almost every kid who, comes out into the world will stretch out the arms and the legs in 4 different directions and screaming for air and more space. And after a year, the same kid will walk out to the house and start to wonder what's between him or she and the horizon. That spirit of exploration, I don't think it ever goes to zero.
Walker & Dunlop brings you insights for life. Unique perspectives from impactful leaders. This is the Walker Webcast with Willy Walker.
As Dr. Ted Schwartz, who I interviewed yesterday, said, as he goes into a brain, it's sort of like watching Waze. You have to adapt through your way through the brain. And I would say that was us adapting. The gentleman to my right has obviously figured out how to adapt his way around the world and to take lots of things that have come into him and adapt and persevere. I thought the best way for me to get to know him, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, was to go on a hike. We woke up early and did Proctor Loop. And the one thing that I knew going on a hike with him was that the pace was going to be really fast. And to say that we passed everyone on the path is an understatement. We really didn't stop throughout it. One of the things we talked about this morning was silence. And you've written a book on silence. And I told you about a scene in my pickup truck as I was listening to silence, and I had 3 teenage boys in the back seat of the car, and we pulled up in front of somewhere, and you were in the midst of talking about getting off of technology, getting into the present, and living in a silent world. And having spent 50 days on the Antarctic ice cap and 58 days with a partner on the North Pole ice cap, you know better than anyone what it is like to be with your own thoughts. And I told you that as we stopped the truck, what I loved was that I thought the 3 teenagers would jump out and head right into the store, and they were sitting there in the back seat captivated by your words and captivated by what you were saying about getting out of the technological world and into the present world. Talk for a moment of what it was like to be on the Arctic ice cap for 50 days with your own thoughts and no other sounds.
It's kind of best experience in my life, at least in terms of beyond family, etc. So I started out on the northern edge of Antarctica, and I didn't have I had a radio. I was forced to bring a radio by my sponsor, and the airline company refused to fly me unless I had a radio. So the last thing I did on the plane before I went onto the ice was to take the batteries out of the radio and dropped it in the garbage. So I didn't tell anyone, and they called me up on the radio every day. And of course, I never looked at the radio. But the reason was because I wanted to be totally by myself. And obviously, I want to get to the geographical point, the South Pole, to be the first to walk there by myself, or first to walk there solo. But also, it was a travel into myself. And what was interesting, of course, to say what happened during 50 days in 1 minute is complicated. But it's what happened was that when I started out, I felt everything was white and everything was flat all the way out to the horizon. But as the days passed by and a few weeks passed by, I start to see more colors. It's a little bit bluish, reddish, yellowish, pinkish in the ice. And also, it was not flat. I saw different structures on the ice and the snow. And then I was wondering, is Antarctica changing or am I changing? And of course, it was me who was changing, that I got a kind of a pause from everything, shut off the world, And then I learned a lesson about silence, and silence is about who you are. Your inner silence, of course, is about who you are, while noise, in the sense, of course, telephones, sounds, light, etc., is about everyone else. And that's why most of us prefer noise, because that's the easiest thing in life, is to escape from yourself, while listening to your inner silence is about getting to know yourself. And of course, getting to know yourself is one of the oldest advices in the world. And I think every advice that has lasted for more than 1,000 years, we should take seriously.
So as you're on the ice cap, either doing North Pole or South Pole, and you are with your own thoughts, what are you thinking about?
Well, that's interesting, because thinking is also kind of a noise. Because when you're thinking, you're usually thinking about the future or the past. So, of course, the most important thing when you ski to the poles is to put one leg in front of the other. So technically wise, it's easy. But what's the most beautiful is to be in the present, not to think. And that's happening after a few days. When you get into rhythm, you kind of, for long periods, you stop thinking. You're just present in the moment. And I think that's one of the most beautiful feelings you can have.
So as you're just in the moment, describe the difference between doing the North Pole and doing the South Pole as it relates to the conditions and the ice cap.
Thing is, Antarctica is a continent circumnavigated by oceans, while the North Pole, or the Arctic, is an ocean circumnavigated by continents. So Antarctica is a continent circumnavigated by oceans, and the Arctic is the opposite. So when you ski to the North Pole, you actually ski on ice that is moving all the time, because just resting on the ocean. So it's very different from Antarctica, when you just walk on ice, which is kind of resting on land mostly. And to walk to the North Pole is by far the most difficult I have done. I did it with a friend, Børge Osland. And when you get to the top of the world, what's interesting is at the North Pole, the sun has the same angle above the horizon for 24 hours. It goes up or down. And you only have one sunset a year at the North Pole. That's 21st of March. And you have now one sunrise, and you have one sunset, which is around the 20th of September. And of course, the wind comes from the south, it's blowing towards the south. And what's also interesting, it's nothing there. So it looks exactly the same at the North Pole as it does a few hundred kilometers away. So the North Pole is just like an idea. And of course, even to the moon, they could bring some rocks back home again. From the North Pole, is absolutely nothing to take with you back home. So it is a part of this to impress my father. And I think, that's the oldest story in the world, is boys wanting to impress their father. It would be much to write about in the Bible if that wasn't the case. And when I get home from the North Pole, my father said, it's stupid to walk to the North Pole. And in one way, he was right. But today we're very good friends, but what he didn't get is, as with everything in life, you need to believe in it. If it's exploration, walk to the North Pole, South Pole, contemporary art, or if it's low, you need to believe in it. So, yeah.
Where did that belief in exploration come from?
I think, everyone is born an explorer. So
some more than others.
Yeah, that's true. But almost every kid who, comes out into the world will stretch out the arms and the legs in 4 different directions and screaming for air and more space. And after a year, the same kid will walk out to the house and start to wonder what's between him or she and the horizon. And soon, what's beyond the horizon. So that's how we're born. And that spirit of exploration, I don't think it ever goes to zero. So I think everything is somewhere between 0.1 and 99.9. So we all have it, but of course, I kept it to a strong degree.
Yeah. How'd you get to 99.9?
I think it's very much about curiosity. It's very much about wandering being kind of an engine in life. It's very much about enjoying nature. I think the biggest mistake we're doing today is to separate ourselves from nature. The whole idea that came out like 500 years ago in the UK by Francis Bacon, a philosopher, that the human should conquer nature. Of course, in Christianity, we are above nature, but we're still a part of nature. But he wanted us to conquer nature, and the humans didn't need nature. And I think that's the origin of so many of the problems we have today, from people claiming to be sad, lonely, depressed, to climate change. Because, of course, with climate change, if you don't relate to nature, it's also difficult to relate to climate change.
So you did...
And also I have to add, and then you also do walk to the North Pole you do it for sympathetic reasons and for less sympathetic reasons. And a less sympathetic reason is you're also doing it because you want to impress, you want to have some recognition.
Clearly you didn't get that from your dad.
No. But that's good
Beyond
too,
your
because I think if you have a very happy childhood, you will never walk to the North Pole.
Ted Schwartz and I talked, both of us, yesterday about having chips on shoulders and how that drives performance. So you did the North Pole in 90, you did the South Pole in 92, and you did Everest in 94. To go from the two extremes of the globe to the highest point on the globe. Which was the hardest?
The North Pole is the hardest. And the North Pole was for 500 years, people tried to get to the North Pole from the 1500s. And I've been to the three places you mentioned, but also been on expeditions in most parts of the world. And the North Pole is by far the most difficult. And it was the most difficult 400 years ago, 300 years ago, and still today. You
talked about the shifting ice cap. Do you ever get to a point where you'd, hiked 15 kilometers in a day and gone to sleep and woken up and you're 10 kilometers behind where you went to sleep?
Yeah, it's exactly, that's very frustrating walk to the North Pole. Ice is moving, and we went from Canada, and the ice is kind of trending to move towards Canada. So we went to sleep and woke up again, and then kind of half the distance we had been struggling through the day before, we are just drifting back again. So it's more like, walking like an escalator, almost like the wrong way though. And you talk about in the book just that in your mind, it's just putting one foot in front of the other. Your day 25, it's freezing, it's dark. What kept you going? Well, the thing is, to give up is almost always worse than keep on going. So you just need to keep that in mind, that if you give up, first of all, it's on this expedition, it was not so easy either, because we didn't have proper communication with the outside world this time either. To say, wait, we could have a big radio, but we were dragging everything we needed for more than 60 days and nights on this sled. So if we want to give up, it could take quite a few days before you were picked up, could take a week, whatever. But what you need to keep in mind is that as soon as you're back home, you will start to regret it. So, and I strongly believe in the importance of making life more difficult than it has to be. So it's because I think that's like, if you're going to have a meaningful life in general, you need to actively make it more difficult. Of course, if you're born in southern Sudan, it's different. But if you're born like me in Norway, and for most of people who are here today, I think it's very important to make it more difficult. You go into quite some detail in the book as it relates to the physical strain, the cold,
the hunger, the just physical taxing of your body, which was the most difficult to deal with?
The cold went down to minus 50 degrees. And you just have to go to the toilet like you do back home, take down the pants, get down into a hockey position, but you do it much, much faster. But but again, it's what makes it meaningful is that you freeze like hell, and then in the evening, although we couldn't heat up the tent, but you get into the sleeping bag and you kind of, for a while, you're kind of warm. And then you get very hungry because you're burning off so many calories. And in the evening, you don't get really full, but kind of full. And you're really, really exhausted, and you get sleep. And I think that's the origin of gratitude, is to get sleep after you have become exhausted, get to eat, get full when you're starving, get warm after you have been freezing. And that's some of the beauty of being in nature, to experience this source of gratitude. And I think that's something we easily forget in daily life, and that makes our life poorer, I think.
You had a dual sleeping bag. The two of you on the North Pole slept together.
For 30 nights, yeah.
For 40 nights to maintain body heat inside of the sleeping bag. On the South Pole, you did it solo. That makes me think as it relates to just fear and the control of fear. Any difference between how you felt from a fearful standpoint on the North Pole versus on the South Pole?
Yeah, to the North Pole, I needed my partner Børge, and he needed me. And, that's a good thing, that if it depends on another person, if you're egocentric, then, you really support your friend. And we really support each other. And I hardly knew him from before, but we had this one dream in common, and that was to become the first to the North Pole without any outside help. And National Geographic, which was the kind of the major magazine in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s also for explorers, because they had every second or third issue, they had an article on expedition. In 87, they wrote, "Is it possible to get to North Pole in this way?" Maybe not, maybe it is. And when we read that in National Geographic, just said, and I didn't know the guy at the time, this is what I'm going to do. And then we met, and I think it was an advantage not to have too much in common. And we hardly spoke at all on the expedition. And we ended up actually only speaking about food because we were so hungry. But we're still friends. I had dinner with him last week, actually.
When we talk about fear, you each took a pistol with you.
Yeah.
Talk about using it.
Yeah. It's one of the difficulties or threats, dangers walking to the North Pole is polar bears. And another difficulty, of course, is that it's lots of open water. So we had designed the sledges like this to bind them together and use them as a raft. And the ocean up there is 3,000 meters deep. So you have to be really, really careful. And we were competing with 4 other expeditions from UK, Canada, Korea, and England to be the first. And we could have waited until the ice had been freezing, or the water had been freezing, but we were in rush, so we kind of paddled across these open leads like this. And it's a huge advantage. But as I write in my book, I was very happy my mother didn't watch me when I was doing this stuff. But anyway, so one day at 88 degrees and 19 minutes, I heard my partner Børge shouted "Hoi!" And he's a man of very few words. So I looked up and saw this polar bear at around 20-25 meters distance, and it was coming towards us. And this far north, now it's warmer, so it's more seals could pop up in open leads, etc. But at this time, the only thing a polar bear could eat this far north was expedition members. and neither of us had any ambition whatsoever to kill a polar bear. But even Gandhi wrote that if you or a family are attacked by lion, you are allowed to kill the lion. So it also matter was who's having who for dinner. And so we dived into the sledges, got our guns, and the bear stopped because it understood we had seen it and hesitate a little bit, which was very fortunate for us. So we got the guns, this Magnum 44s with very short barrels because you need to save weight all the time. But the disadvantage of the short barrel, 2 inches barrel, is that it's very difficult to hit anything. So the bear was standing there watching us. We were watching the bear, and then Børge thought National Geographic. He had this dream about having his photos published in National Geographic. So he dropped his gun quickly, grabbed the camera. This was the time he had a film in the camera. Got the film into the camera, and then he convinced me to stand between himself.
That's your Clint Eastwood moment right there.
So. Come on, Teddy, make my day. But soon after, the bear turned towards us, started to dig its 4 feet into the snow, and charged. And the bear can run up to 40 miles an hour, and this probably ran like 25 or 30, and it's 20 meters, 25 meters. You just have one shot each. Fortunately, we hit it. But if we hadn't killed the bear would have been sitting here today. But first we stayed absolutely cool when it was happening. But as soon as the bear was dead, we were both just standing there shaking because we had been super scared. And also we were a bit sad because we had to kill the bear. But we still took a few stakes and took with us.
Had you practiced that? Had you practiced shooting a gun? Had you practiced being charged by any kind of animal, a duck?
Now we have both. In Norway, it's a compulsory army service. We've both been in the army, and Børge was a Navy SEAL. And I have a fairly good shot, but we shot it at 8 meters distance. And
so you miss, you're done.
Yeah.
You got to wait that long.
Yeah, we had to wait, and it's really close. And then, from in that speed for 8 meters is like yeah.
You talked about weight and how important weight was. You took one book with you. First of all, tell us what book it was, and second, did you have any time to read it?
I didn't have any time to read it. I think I only brought the New Testament.
That's right.
Yeah, and the idea was, nice to have some things to think about, like for 15-30 minutes in the evening or something. And of course, the New Testament or the Bible is what gives you the most ideas per gram as possible. So I think that it was 28 grams, I think, the New Testament, and one I got from my grandmother. But I don't think I opened it once actually. But it's I when I walked to the South Pole, I brought New Testament again and some other religious literature, and then I was reading 1 hour every evening.
So you talk about getting to the North Pole and it really being more of a image or a figment of your imagination than an actual spot. Talk for a moment about when you got to the South Pole.
Yeah, that's so. And you never know how long time such an expedition is going to take. But after 50 days and nights, I came to the South Pole, and then the Americans have built a base at the South Pole. And because I didn't have any radio, no one was expecting me. And I walked in there, and these Americans came out, and they said almost like you should have met them on the street in New York or in a Ketchum. And how do you do? And I said, like a pig in shit. Because I had the same underwear on for 50 days and nights without taking it off once. And also the North Pole, we actually had it on for 63 days and nights without taking it off.
But you do point out that Because it's so cold, the bacteria doesn't build to the...
Yeah, it's so cold, so everything freezes. So it's even in towards the North Pole, it's not even any smells because everything that can freeze freezes. So the only shit which is out there is the shit you bring with you.
Right.
So you don't really get sick. So that's the least problem in the world, that you don't change the underwear.
And you wrote in the book that the thing you dreaded the most in arriving at the South Pole was
noise. Yeah, it was really strange because I really enjoyed life, skiing all day, eating healthy food, sleeping 8 hours, skiing all day again. So the only thing I kind of missed was, and I consider myself to be a very social guy, so it's not something I want to do for the rest of my life. But the only thing I really missed was skin contact. Of course, you miss quite a few other things too, but you miss, someone holding on, really giving a hug or something. That was the only thing that I kind of deeply missed.
So you'd done the North Pole and you'd done the South Pole, and now all of a sudden there was real pressure on to get to the top of Everest as quickly as you could.
Yeah. So that's kind of I don't think it is unsympathetic, but I can understand it could be, it could be considered to be not so sympathetic that you have this very competitive edge. Usually I don't compete in nature at all. But it was 15 guys. Today, lots of women doing the same stuff, but it has mostly been a man-dominated thing, Western man-dominated thing. I want to be the first to North Pole, South Pole, top of Everest on foot. I know there's 15 other guys had done this 2 out of the 3, so I was really in a rush. And so I went in '94. I went to Everest, walked up to Everest Base Camp, and I was pretty certain I was not going to turn around before I was at the summit.
And how many other people, to those of us who now look at these pictures of people piled up on the Hillary step, how many people summited Everest in '94 versus summit Everest in 2025?
Ooh, I'm not sure about the numbers, but I guess the spring '94, I would think maybe 30, 40 people summited altogether during that spring. And today, it's 10 times as many. So it has changed, but it's so when I came to Hillary Step, I was alone. And today you see this long line. But I'm not here to criticize people climbing Everest today, because it's, first of all, I'm sure people like me have inspired quite a few people to climb Everest. So I think it's unfair to criticize, but also, we're just unlucky. I was lucky. I was born in '63, so I could do all this the way I did it. If I'd been born some decades later, I had to stand in the same queue. So, yeah. Or maybe I wouldn't have stood in the same queue, done something else. So when I was a little kid, I was a bit sad I wasn't born 100 years earlier, so I could do everything as the first. But today I'm happy I wasn't born 30 years later.
So when you think about arriving in those 3 spots, you arrive in the North Pole and a U.S. spy plane flies over. Talk about that moment.
Yeah, that was really strange. We're at the North Pole, and as I said, we didn't have a proper radio. We had this kind of transmitter could send to the outside world that we have reached the North Pole. And after a couple of days, suddenly hear an airplane, and we look up and we see this plane without any identification passing us in a very low altitude. And of course, we were surprised. And Børge took up this VHF radio, and put on channel 16 and tried to call up the plane. And I was stamping with my feet back and forth in the snow, food, because we were so hungry. And the plane turned around, and it's really difficult to, because everything is the same, looks the same, but they managed to get back to see us again. And we got them on the radio, and they asked us, could you identify yourself? And Børge, with very heavy Norwegian accent, said, We are just two Norwegians that have walked to the North Pole.
Do you- Tell them what they did, and then I'm going to ask you the next question. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then they asked us to, but is it emergency? If it's no emergency, and but we still would appreciate some food. So they dropped food, and then asked, would you like some reading material? And we hadn't read anything but Pollard literature for this last couple of years. So we said, yes, please. And what we got was National Enquirer and Penthouse.
I'm just curious. Do you think they would have dropped the food and the magazines if you'd said you were from some other country? I was sitting there thinking, like, we're just two Norwegian explorers. They said, okay, we like those guys.
Exactly. It was very generous.
Yeah. And so then we've already talked about the South Pole when you arrived, and you were dreading speaking, and second of all, when they asked you how you doing, you said, I feel like a pig in shit. Talk about getting to the top of Everest and the transition from elation to fear.
Yeah, today, because so many people climbing Everest, people say it's easy to climb Everest, but the mountain is just as high, of course. And but also psychological wise, it's getting easier. Many people have done it, but still, it's very high, and it's not much oxygen. It's great fresh air, but there's very little of it. So I got super exhausted. I overestimate myself a little bit above 8,000 meters, pushed on a little bit too hard. Had to sit down, fell asleep at maybe 8,600 or 700 meters above sea level. Woke up again, kept on pushing, got to the summit. I was super duper happy, moved, I almost cried a little bit. But then you haven't been on Everest for long before you start ask yourself, how in hell should I get down again? And of course, that's the greatest danger, to get down, because then you're easily more confident. And too much confidence can be very bad for you, because you have to be super, I wouldn't say afraid, but you have to be concerned all the time. So many people have, and I knew a few, that kind of die on the way down, because they, I've been to the summit, it's great, I just have to get down into the valley, and then you do a little mistake, and then it's over. So you have to be careful every step.
You talk a lot about gratitude. In those 3 moments, is that the core emotion you feel as it relates to gratitude? Or is gratitude something you get once you've gotten home and are thinking back and reflecting on it?
Well, I think it's hard to get down from the mountain before I felt gratitude, I think. Yeah. But I try to feel gratitude every day. I think that's, as I said, gratitude is, it's very complicated to have a good life if you don't feel gratitude, I think. And it's all very complicated to have a good life if you don't try to be generous and kind.
I will comment, this morning as we were out on our hike, most people in Sun Valley, when you pass somebody on the trail, you say, how you doing? And they say, I'm great. His comment this morning, what'd you say in the first person we passed? It was something far beyond I'm great.
I think I said that. She said, how are you doing? I said, I've never been better.
Never been better. That struck me.
I think, I think in general, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to walk to the North Pole. You don't need to do anything. But I think you're better off if you're a little bit optimistic.
How do you think I felt when I heard him say, I've never been better? I was like, we're on a hike on Proctor Loop. I mean, come on. Talk for a moment about, you're a voracious reader. You read all the time.
Yeah.
And it clearly informs your writing.
Yeah.
What do you read?
I read, I could say I read anything, but I feel to read anything, but I try to read literature of great quality. And I think that's a meaning of life. You need to fulfill your own potentials. So if you read lousy books, listen to lousy music, see lousy TV, etc., eventually you get 60, 70, 80 years old and you start to wonder, was this my life? all those days and weeks and months and years passed by, and this was my life. So I think, so in terms of reading, yeah, I read, great nonfiction, read lots of philosophy, great fiction. I was just in Japan with my daughters. I read, I think, 12 novels, Japanese novels, the 3 Nobel Prize winners, but also some other stuff, just to get into Japanese literature. And yeah, so and I read, good magazines. I read FT, Economist, etc., to keep updated. Yeah. I'm not, people need X, Blue Cloud, etc., because, that's the only way they can keep up. But, it's not my experience.
Do you restrict the amount of time you spend on technology?
No, but I'm good at putting my phone on airplane mode.
I was surprised, and it didn't actually surprise me, that you really don't measure. We were walking this morning and my dog was running after us, and he's a small little thing and he has these legs that are about this long. And I mentioned how many steps we passed somebody and they said, oh, what a cute little dog. And I said, think about how many steps he's going to take on this hike. And Erling said to me, I've never measured my steps. I then asked him, you ever gone to the gym? Nope.
So I don't think there's anything wrong measuring the steps or going to the gym. It's not my thing. And in terms of walking, I think, some of the beauty of walking, you walk because walking is good for you. It's great for you. It should not necessarily be a means to something else that you should, 10,000, whatever. It's totally okay. But it's walking it's good for health, it's good for your creativity, it's good for so many things. And Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, 2,500 years ago, he said, the best medicine for all times will always be to do a walk. And he said, if you not feel better after one walk, you should do a second walk. And his third advice was, just make sure that the doctor doesn't give you the wrong medicines.
So walking, reading, and silence.
Yeah,
it was in silence that you came up with the idea for your company. Talk for a moment about how you use that silence to not only be at peace with yourself, but come up with the ideas that you come up with.
It's today's science has kind of confirmed that walking is really good for creativity. But this is something people have known for thousands of years. The reason Socrates kept on walking was not because he wanted to get much more fit to impress his wife, but it was because it was good for his creativity. So, they kept on walking. And, why did Steve Jobs also kept on walking? It was good for his mind. So, but anyways, with silence too, is also very good for creativity. And when I came up with the idea to start a book publishing business, my girlfriend was pregnant. I want to live in Norway. I want to have a job. I was a lawyer, so I could go back to law, but I didn't want to sit in the back seat anymore. So I wanted to be the boss in my own company. So I had to start myself. I was doing the dishes back home. I enjoyed doing the dishes. And then I thought, book publishing. It's very conservative. Someone like me can find my own path, create a company. I didn't start it for idealistic reasons, but whatever you do, the world is getting worse or better by what you're doing. And I thought with book publishing, the world gets a little bit better. Yeah. It was a good forum to say it, huh?
What was you saying earlier? I said we've been really lucky to be successful, and you were like, we like the success better than the failure. Does it relate?
Can I tell a love story before we take the questions?
Yeah.
I could have told one about my girlfriend, but this is a different one. Sorry. Okay, so it's when I researched the North Pole book, the history of the North Pole, to my great positive surprise, the history went much, much further back in time into prehistoric times. But also, of course, as the whole history was also, as soon as you get into the 16th century, it was about, as I said, Western men, white men, trying to conquer the world, conquer nature. But then the story which is not much told is that not all, but most of these men, they had wives, girlfriends, fiancés, kids, family back home. And until recently, there was no way to communicate with the outside world. So the men left, and they were away for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, no news. And quite often, the guys disappeared. To the North Pole, they say about 1,000 people tried to get to the North Pole until the 1890s, and 751 died. So, of course, and until 1896, people knew more about Venus, Jupiter, and the bright side of the moon than they knew about the North Pole, because the planets they had looked on with telescopes in 1608. Why? Because that's when the telescope was invented. But the North Pole, no one had been close to. So then in 1897, these 3 Swedish explorers decided to fly to the North Pole in an air balloon, which was a good idea because everyone had failed so far. And this should take off in July 1897. And just before departure, they were informed by this Norwegian explorer, Fridtjof Nansen, greatest Norwegian ever to be alive, I think. And he sent them a letter and said, you will have headwinds all the way. Because he had been drifting across the Arctic Ocean for the 3 previous years, checked the weather every second hour, and headwinds. So he said, you need to decide, should you return to Sweden, have the courage to return to Sweden without trying, and be considered to be cowards by your fellow Swedes? And the world, like New York Herald had their own journalists to cover the expeditions. This was a kind of a world sensation, the whole thing. Or do you have less courage and make a dash for the North Pole? And the Swedes said, there's no way we're going to turn around before we had tried. So they took off, and after 2.5 days, they landed on the ice just between the North Pole and Svalbard, this archipelago north of Norway. And no way they're going to get closer to the North Pole, so they got the sledges they had in the balloon, or in the basket under the balloon, and started to walk southwards. One of the guys, Niels Strindberg, he got engaged 8 months previously. So his fiancée on the photo here, she was waiting through July while the guys were walking. They walked southwards. They didn't have, at that time, you didn't have a proper map. It was just one line on the map, an island someone claimed to have seen called White Island. And they walked through August, September. Anna was waiting. They came to the island 5th of October. And after 3 days, they were all dead. And Anna was waiting through 98, 99, 1900. And eventually, 1910, she married this British guy. And in 1930, but she kept a photo of her fiancé in the living room. And in 1930, the remains of the 3 Swedes were found at White Island by some Norwegian explorers. And they got the remains of the body sent to Sweden, and they found Niels, and around his neck he had this medallion, and inside the medallion he had this photo. And in his pocket he had his diary and love letters he had written to Anna. So it was like, dear Anna, to begin with, it was, everything is fine. I will be home in a few weeks, and then we will marry. And then they landed on the ice and said, no, I'm worried about you because you will be worried about me because I will use a few more months before you will see me, but I'm fine and we'll get married in the autumn. And then you get into September, and then he writes, now I'm even more worried about you. I love you, but I won't make it back home before the winter. So I will winter on the ice if you don't find any land. But in the spring, I will be back home, and then we will marry. And Anna, of course, was very moved. They had a funeral. She didn't attend the funeral because she was married, but she sent flowers and just said, for Niels from Anna. And in 1948, she dies. And in her will, it says, my body should be cremated and buried in my husband's family grave. But prior to cremation, my heart should be literally cut out and cremated separately, and be buried with my fiancée. So the 5th of September 1930, Strindberg, her fiancé's brother, and some other old friends, they went early in the morning, foggy morning in Sweden. Difficult to get permissions in Sweden for many things. So they digged up the grave, halfway down, put this little silver box with the ashes into the grave, and ashes to ashes, etc.
Wonderful story. Before I open up to questions, I will one quick anecdote. The two of us had a pre-call scheduled for 2 weeks ago, and he was out on a hike coming back to do the pre-call and got delayed on the hike and couldn't send me a note saying he was going to be late. So I got onto the Zoom call, and I sat there and looked at the Zoom screen. And typically, if I'm waiting for a Zoom call to begin, I grab up my phone and I'm multitasking and waiting until the person appears on the screen. And I sat there and thought about the book Silence and all that he has written about and all that he has experienced. And so rather than grab my iPhone and start multitasking, waiting for him to show up, I just sat there and stared at the screen and was with myself for 10 minutes until he still hadn't shown up and I cut it off.
I was out hiking without my phone.
That's exactly right.
And I forgot the time.
And I use that as a closing point only because the book about the North Pole is fascinating, and his accomplishments as an explorer are incredibly noteworthy and interesting, and the way he writes about it is fantastic. But I could not recommend the book Silence more, given the world that we all live in today and the constant noises that we have around us and the reminders that we have on our phones when we all walked in here to turn your phone off. And we all sit there and say, oh God, got to make sure that it's not buzzing or ringing while I'm in this setting. And I would posit, and I'm as guilty as anyone in this room as it relates to being connected to technology, after hearing Erling and all of his, life story, work, and also just going to the extremes as it relates to getting unplugged and being silent, take that to the next level. He talks in the book Silence about a study that was done at USC and Harvard.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
About a number of adults being asked to sit for 15 minutes in silence. And very few of them could get through the 15 minutes without saying, get me out of here. And then what they did was they said, if you want to get out of here, we'll give you a shock that you've already experienced that really hurt. But if the silence gets to you too much in the 15 minutes, you can press this button, you can get shocked, and you can get out of here. And what percentage of the people hit the shock?
Almost all of them eventually. And Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher in the 1650s, I think, he wrote that the origin of every problem for man is that he's not able to sit by himself alone in a room doing nothing. So instead of doing nothing, he will do something, and that's the beginning of all the problems.
So I will cut our conversation off on that. Let's go to questions while we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got Garrick over there.
Thank you, guys. Really, I wanted to ask, as you were for months on end walking this path that is, in real proximity to death, where was this idea of death located in your head the whole time? And were there moments when you really engaged with this idea and this possibility, and how did the idea of it evolve?
The answer to the last question is never, in the sense that, when you are there, when you're in nature for a while, you become more and more at one with the nature. So you feel that your body doesn't stop by your skin or your fingertips, but, you kind of extends into the nature. You're part of the ice, you're part of the wind, you're part of the temperature, you're part of the colors. So you don't get you don't get that fear that you're close to death, and really you're very, very seldom close to death. But it's always a little bit dangerous, but if it hadn't been dangerous, it would be kind of pointless. So then anyone could do it. But then again, with fear of death, very seldom. But of course, with the polar bear, etc., and a few other times, and also in Everest, I almost fall off a cliff. then you're close to death. But I really don't think about it much before after it's over.
You talk in the book a bunch about perspective on that issue and the stars. Talk for a moment about, because you talk a lot about the North Star and the true North Pole, but you also talk about living somewhere where you can actually see the stars.
Yeah, I think, it's when I write about nature, but also to be able to see the stars. Like, most people in the world now live in places where you hardly ever or maybe never ever see any stars. And I think that's a huge disadvantage, because just to look into a starry night and contemplate and let your wonder kind of grow, and really teaches you a lesson about who you are, and also how you relate to the universe, and also, at least me, and I think it's kind of common, that you get a feeling of how little you are compared to everything, how important you are, unimportant you are, but then also you also knew that after all you are part of the whole thing, you are part of the whole universe. And I think that's a great reminder. So that's like noise in shape of man-made light.
Got one in the way back.
So after all you've accomplished and done, being incredible places, what in the world do you do to challenge yourself and push yourself today?
Today, it's the greatest challenge being a polar explorer is to, and has always been, is to get up in the morning at the right time every day, even when it's minus 50 in the tent. And, it's kind of today too, to get up and do something interesting. And I think it's important to, that's not my idea, so all idea is to fulfill your own potentials. And one reason I'm still doing expeditions, but less impressive, but also do many other things, because, you need to do different things in life. And I think, to write this book on the North Pole, I had a full-time job and many other things to do, but it still took me 6 years. And I think was really worthwhile. So it's all the challenges to do. It's always, and I'm also sometimes asked, like, is there anything more to explore? It's always more to explore. And, some of the biggest mysteries for you will always be in your own backyard. And that's what travel literature, every second book on, big books on travel, is that you travel far, far away and to find some answers. And when you eventually return back home, you find the answers.
We got one right there as the microphone's getting to him. I asked him this morning, is there anyone where on the face of the planet that you haven't been that you'd like to go to? He said, no, because I can go anywhere that I want to go.
I'm a lucky guy, but I'm not unlucky. I'm fully aware I'm lucky.
Yeah. Can
Sir,
you
go
talk
ahead.
about your beginning to collect art, how that happened?
Yeah, I always been interested in art, at least since I was an early teenager. My father had an uncle who was a painter. I thought he was a very funny guy. Not very successful guy, but still, he was painting, and he was different. And then when I was 21, I bought my first art piece for 2 bottles of wine. The artist was desperate to get some more wine. And I still have the piece. I was jealous. It was this Edvard Munch inspired, these 3 men floating in front of a beautiful woman. And it was about jealousy. My girlfriend just left me, and I identified with the work. And today, it's probably worth less than those 2 bottles of wine. But then I didn't have time or money to buy any art, so I bought maybe 1 or 2 pieces a year for many years. But in the late 90s, I earned enough money from book publishing to buy a beautiful house, which was one of my goals for my family. And then I felt I was free to spend the money as I liked. So then I spent everything on art. And it's the similarity with exploration is it's very difficult to get contemporary art, because modern art, older art, and art historians already told whoever catching up what's great. But if you buy contemporary art and young art like I'm mostly doing, it's no one has really decided whether it's great art or not. So I like it, but it's an obsession, just like the North Pole. It's not, you don't become an art collector on a big way or polar explorer if you not have this obsessive personality. Yeah.
He also talks in the book about how art is appreciated through silence and the messages that come to you through art without anyone having to say anything.
Yeah.
Nini?
Great art is usually about silence. Lousy art is about noise.
We have time for about one or two more.
Yeah. Your life has been really dedicated to your physical fitness and your physical body. Have you ever had an injury that you've had to overcome in order to pursue your passion?
Yeah, quite a few injuries. All the way from the neck and down to my toes. I once thought I'd broken the neck, and I died in shallow water. And I came to the hospital. That was with a helicopter, super serious. And eventually the guy said, "You didn't break your neck this time, but you actually did it quite a few years ago." and I wasn't aware.
Let's go with one more, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Hi, when you're not surrounded by thousands of miles of ice and you're in the world with constant stimulation, how do you keep a sense of presence and like inner silence almost?
I think it's could be complicated because, as I said, it's much more tempting to go for noise than inner silence. But so for me too, I can end up checking the news 3 times in 1 hour, which of course is just total waste of time. And I Google something and find it, and 20 minutes later I'm still Googling. But having said that, I think it's easy to underestimating your own potential for experiencing inner silence, because that silence is there all the time, just waiting for you. And you could find it when you have a shower in the morning. You can find it, if you walk a few stations instead of taking the metro. You find it if you do the stairs instead of the lift. You can find it when you're cooking. You can find it when you're making love to your boyfriend, whatever. So this silence is there all the time, or even better, do a walk, whatever. So it's this silence at all times. You can find it, the noisiest place in the world, you can find silence.
So as we thank everyone for being here, talk about what you say at the very end of silence.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons I have made an effort to write these books on silence and the North Pole and walking, etc., is not because I want to inspire everyone to do the same as I have done, but it is to inspire and motivate for everyone to find their own self-poles. Thank you.